I remember the way the light used to fall across that kitchen table the evening I found out. It made the wood look like it had a history inside it. Like every scratch and every darkened place was a memory being held there in the grain. I'd kept that table through 2 marriages, through the births of my children, through nights of worry and mornings of ordinary miracle. I sat there with my hands wrapped around a mug that was going cold and thought, for the first time in my life, that the furniture in my home had started to recognize secrets the way people do. When I was young, I believed in the simple fairness of life. If you loved someone, you cared for them. If you told them you loved them, you stayed. That was how my mother taught me. Those lessons seemed true for a long time. Then life taught me a bloody, hard lesson, that sometimes the people you love most will do things that don't make sense to your chest, things that leave you reeling and raw. And sometimes the pain comes not from outside the family, but from the people sitting next to you at dinner. My daughter used to sleep on my lap when thunderstorms came. She trusted the world the way a child does, easily, without calculation. She would tuck her knees under and lay her small head on my thigh and look up at me with those bright eyes like the world was a promise. I vowed then, with the naivete of a young mother, that I would always be the place she came back to. I thought second chances were something you earned, but I didn't think they would come wrapped in the shape of betrayal. When I married again, when life had already taught me some hard lessons, I was looking for steady. My second husband, I'll call him Robert. He had a soft way of saying things that made you believe him. He came into our life like a warm lantern after a long walk through the dark. He helped pay bills, fixed the leaky gutter, laughed with my daughter about the small things. At first I thought the 3 of us would make a quiet, ordinary family that everyone wants in the end. But you can never know what lives behind a smile until you step into the room and see the way eyes look at each other. Across the table in the way laughter can hide hunger. The first little thing I noticed I excused away. My daughter would start to come home late from errands. When she did come in, there was a slight perfume on her collar that hadn't been there before, or the edge of a man's shirt in the laundry that was not my husband's. It's funny how you make excuses for the people you love. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself trust is what holds the house together. It's what I told myself at first, and then what I told myself the second time, and the third. Each excuse was a small stitch to patch the threadbare part of my heart. I began to note the things I could not put down into tidy sentences. The late-night texts she deleted quickly when she saw me in the doorway. The way she laughed a little too much at things she didn't used to find funny. The way my husband's eyes lingered on moments a married man's eyes shouldn't linger. Some nights, lying wide awake with the hum of the refrigerator filling the dark like a low concerto, I'd listen for the pattern of their movement through the house and wonder if the house itself was breathing, strange with secrets. The night I walked in God, that is a night wrapped in glass in my memory. It was raining, the kind of rain that makes the world feel like it's been rinsed clean and leaving nothing but the essentials. I had gone upstairs with a basket of laundry and a mind full of small household problems. I'd been humming something light, something useless. I moved down the hall toward the linen closet. And there it was, the soft sound from the guest room, a murmur, a rustle of 2 bodies that shouldn't have been in the same private place. The doorknob was not locked. It was slightly ajar, as though even the door itself was trying to hide. I pushed it open. The sight of them together felt like a wind that had run into a window. She was on the bed, and he was there with her. The kind of closeness that is not a mistake. It cut something in me open and left me weak. In that split second they noticed me, and then they were scrambling not for my forgiveness, not for remorse, but for excuse. I didn't listen. I felt suddenly like a child again. The first time I discovered where my mother hid the candies, embarrassed and furious, Only this time, the candy was the piece of me they had eaten of their own free will. I didn't collapse right away. I steadied myself on the doorframe and walked out like a ghost who had something to keep secret, the truth. I didn't throw plates. I didn't shout the way soap opera people do in the movies. I closed the door and went downstairs. I sat in the kitchen long after they had left the room to collect themselves. And the house hummed with the ordinary things, pipes running. The refrigerator, the intermittent tick of a clock. I stared at the spot on the table where my wedding album lay and realized how fragile the pictures were. Paper will lie flat. But paper cannot lie about what it felt like when we were young and believed in forever. The days that followed were quiet in a way that tore my chest apart. I had to decide what kind of woman I was. There are many ways to respond to being betrayed. Some scream and wreck the room. Some crawl into bedsheets and never emerge. I had always been neither. I had been patient, sensible, and careful. Now I had to be patient with a new purpose. I had to watch. I had to gather. Not because I wanted revenge in the first burning instant, but because there are things that come later. Consequences that need the weight of proof. So I became slow as a winter river. I watched how they touched the sugar jar. I watched how the phone was left face down at night. The faint smell of her perfume on his shirts when he left for late meetings. I kept a notebook. I wrote down dates, times, little things. I found copies of messages she thought she had deleted. The more I found, the colder the anger turned into a kind of professional clarity. I made a list of what I would do, and the order in which I would do it, like someone planning a crossing through ice. You have to understand, this wasn't only about betrayal. It was about the life I had given. About the savings I had tucked away into the folders I kept under the false-bottomed drawer. About the trust I had poured into small, steady investments. This home and my peace had been built with the kind of labor that doesn't look like much to strangers. The rightness of what I would do later had to be built on a foundation of fact. So I collected facts. And while I watched and collected, I mourned too. I mourned the image of my daughter that had been wiped smooth by the reckless decisions of a grown woman. She had always been my light. The way she would dance in the kitchen. The way she made a bad day okay with one crooked smile. Seeing her secretive, seeing the shame prickle in the corners of her laughter. It did something to me that I hadn't expected. The anger and the love coiled together into something complicated. I could have gone to her that night and screamed, asked, why? Until her answers fell apart. But I could see something in her eyes that said there was guilt there. Yes, but also confusion. She was not a monster. She was a woman who had slipped into bad choices and let them wash over her. The man beside her, he had chosen to enroll her in this lie, and that cut deeper. When I finally acted, it was with a calm I had rehearsed. I called my lawyer not to make a scene, but to understand what the law said. I made an appointment to speak to the bank, not to shout, but to learn what signatures could be changed, what accounts I could freeze. I pulled out tax records and mortgage papers, and the little signed receipts from years of fixing roofs and gutters, while saving spare dollars in the cookie tin. I spoke to neighbors, quiet conversations over hedges, and a sense of help that surprises you when you are in trouble. The day I confronted them, the house was full of ordinary light. There was a softness to the world, birds perhaps unaware of the violence that can live inside the sweetest places. I called them to the table. They came in like children with scraped knees, eager to know if I would scold them. My daughter's face was a maze of shame and anticipation. My husband's face wore a practiced calm. I set the mug down hard enough that the rim rattled, a small percussion in the room of my life. I told them I knew. I told them everything I had watched, with the dates and times and paper fragments as proof. I watched their faces shrink and then try to put on defenses that, in the end, were only mirrors, apology without depth, anger that turned thirsty and ugly. I did not scream. I told them, in quiet sentences, what I would do if they tried to bluff their way out. I would move the house from their hands. I would ensure the accounts they thought were safe were no longer in their control. I would make certain of the truth being known to family and neighbors and, if necessary, authorities. I wanted them to know the reality of consequences. Sometimes the weight of that is more shattering than any shout. They left that night. They packed under the pretense of working things out, of needing space to breathe. But the truth is, the house can feel empty in many ways. And leaving sometimes is a way of confirming what you cannot fix. After they closed the door, I walked around the rooms like a woman who had lost a map. There were dishes in the sink, like breadcrumb trails of the life that had been. I threw them in the dishwasher and scrubbed until my hands were tender. Habit is its own consolation. Doing small work is like prayer when your world has been broken. In the weeks after, the town's gossip started. People had seen the heavy car leaving. The moving trucks crowded on our street. The boxes stacked by the curb. When we used to wave good morning to the woman walking her dogs, now their eyes flicked and lingered on me the way people look at a house they think might be on sale. There is a small cruelty in people's curiosity. They want the drama of another's life on their doorstep for a while and then will tire of it. I let them have their gossip. It was nothing compared to the work of stepping back into myself. Stepping back into myself was not a single act. It was a long series of small adjustments. I changed the color of the living room walls from the soft beige that used to echo their warmth to a rich, assertive blue that felt like a new beginning. I bought new curtains that let light in a way that felt deliberate and clean. I kept my mornings like appointments. Tea, a walk, the post. A call to the woman at the corner grocery who once taught me how to make jam. Those routines were like stitches, mending the hole in the fabric that the betrayal had ripped. People ask me if I ever thought about forgiveness. Of course I did. I am not heartless. There were days when I felt the pull to be small and welcoming, to wrap my arms around them and say, we all fall. We all err. Let us be gentle, but forgiveness is not a thing to be given lightly when deceit has taken the place of honesty. Forgiveness comes later, when wounds are understood and it is not an automatic bomb that erases the fact that someone has rearranged your life without your consent. For a while, I needed my boundary more than I needed their apology. There were moments when the grief was physical. I'd stand at the sink and find myself pressed to the cool tile with a cup of water, clutched in a hand that did not want to hold anything at all. I would open the drawer where, for years, I had kept small letters and notes my daughter had tucked into pockets as a child. I'd read them until the words softened into something else, proof that love had been there once and could be again in different forms. Those old notes were a salve, the scraped knee Band-Aid poem, the I love you, Mama, spelled in childish, crayon little treasures that remind you what you had once that deserved guarding. Time softened things in ways that surprised me. Not the sharpness of the betrayal. That lingered like a shadow at the edge of every decision. But the edges of the day-to-day, the tea at noon, the cat that slept in the sunbeam on the porch, the neighbor who brought fresh bread and didn't say, I'm sorry about your troubles, as if that was a verdict, but rather sat and passed the bread like time itself would do the mending. People do not always know how. They show up in small ways. I spent a Sunday afternoon in my garden that summer, planting marigolds and whispering to the soil, small things that felt like promises. There is a dignity in tending life. It teaches you that even after things are uprooted and stolen away, you can plant again. Not everything you plant will bloom the same way, but you will have the joy of sunlight and dirt and watching new green push up. The work of gardening was like therapy. It required focus and patience, the willingness to get your hands dirty and your knees sore. It was also accountability. You must tend what grows. I considered writing a letter to my daughter. Once all the things I wanted to say that Conversation alone seemed too small for. I would have told her that I did not want her to be lost inside who she had been with him, that I needed her to be the woman she had been when she danced in the kitchen, not someone made small by shame. I would have told her that I loved her, but that love was not permission to stitch over the edges of my life with deceit. Instead, I visited her once, the two of us in the quiet of a small cafe where the clerk knew my name and called out a cheerful afternoon. Mrs. Ellis. She looked older, of course. There are things about pain that age you quicker than years. We sat across from each other, and without theatrical words, we began. She apologized in a way that made me ache and made me understand. She had swum through her own sea of confusion to get to that shoreline. Apology is a door. Opening it does not mean you walk through blindly. I accepted the apology with a measured nod. The important thing to me was that she started stepping out of the shadow she'd let herself fall into. The hardest part, I tell anyone who asks, is reconciling the image of someone you love with the things they do that are wrong. My husband was not a monster who sprang from thin air. He was a man who chose poorly. That choice does not justify the pain. It explains how a man built of ordinary choices can become someone who hurts you worst. Understanding that was not forgiveness. It was clarity. With clarity, we could choose again. Months became a year, and the house continued. Unlike a woman who had been off balance, but now had found her feet. My mornings had routines. My afternoons had chores and reading. My evenings had the small pleasure of a neighbor's company. I met other women at the church's knitting circle who had stories like mine, tales of disappointment that were more creative in their cruelty than anything you read in novels. We fed each other soup and advice. We knitted and comforted and sometimes swore in sympathetic rage at the men who had been unfaithful. Community is a strange, necessary thing, a patchwork of small hands that help resew the torn fabric of life. I learned, too, that strength is not the kind you show to frighten people. It is the kind you cultivate quietly so that your life has a backbone. I learned this in tiny, almost invisible ways. In the way my hands steadied when I held a cup of tea. In the way my voice didn't tremble when the lawyer called to confirm the legal changes I had made. In the way I could look in a mirror and name the woman looking back. There was a dignity in this, a reclamation of a self that had been diluted. I'd been a mother and a wife and a caretaker, roles I cherished. But I had not allowed myself to have the role of protector of my own peace. I had rectified that. People ask, sometimes, whether I ever feared being alone. Of course I did. We are wired to fear the unknown and built to love companionship. But there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. I found, by degrees, that being alone was an opportunity to practice curiosity about myself again. I learned to enjoy my own company. I took walks in the evenings simply to listen to my steps. I started to read novels I had shelved years ago because life had seemed too full then. Books became companions and windows. My mind began to open in ways it had been too occupied to welcome. And sometimes, late at night, when the world had run out of its louder news, I would sit on the porch and look at the stars. There is a way the sky exists that asks nothing of you. Those nights freed me. They were a quiet balm, a reminder that the tiny corner of trouble that had once seemed like an apocalypse was, in the larger frame, a story that would be part of a longer life. The stars do not taunt you. They hold the humility of the world as easily as a woman holds a teacup. It was humbling and healing. Time does its work. People change, or they do not. My ex-husband moved on, as people with little shame sometimes do. My daughter, with time and therapy and the slow reconciling words of honest living, found her way back to herself. We placed new threads next to old ones, building a pattern that acknowledged the rips. It is, in its way, more honest. I allowed her to visit when she proved steady in her life. When she showed me she had learned how to be her truer self without leaning on lies, I learned to greet her with a measured heart, full of both motherly love and the guarded wisdom that pain had taught me. If you ask me the largest truth I've taken from all of it, I would say this: betrayal hurts not merely because of the act, but because you have to look at the person who did it and realize they are always partly who you love and partly who you must reckon with. It's a strange, uncomfortable double. We are made of contradictions. People who hurt us are still sometimes the sources of beauty in other contexts. The trick is learning to love the good you can with the eyes of a mind that refuses to be naive about the bad. And perhaps the most practical thing I did, the quiet act that soothed a sharp place inside me, was to make sure that whatever wealth I had, modest though it was, would be under my control. I reworked the accounts. I updated the will to reflect my wishes clearly. I made sure that no one could use my heart as a loophole to take more than they should. Not because I wanted to be vindictive, but because I wanted agency. I wanted to know that my life's labor could not be converted overnight into someone else's advantage. That care is not petty. It is the backbone of surviving a betrayal with your feet on solid ground. People sometimes imagine revenge as a high drama, but the revenge I carved out was quieter. It was taking back my mornings, my home, my decisions. It was choosing to live a life that did not revolve around the tremors they caused me. It was making room for joy again. When you take small, steady actions to secure your life, the result is a kind of poetry. Flowers planted in the beds where old fights had once tasted like iron. Curtains new and bright. Photographs that I had loved that reflected a life I still valued. One of the sweetest acts of the next years was the day my granddaughter, a small person who did not know the heavy parts of family life, came to visit. She ran through the house with a paper crown askew on her head, full of the pure impulse to be silly, to lay claim to the world in a joyous way. I watched her and felt something in me loosen. Her delight was a small exorcism of all that had been heavy. I scooped her up, perched her on my knee, and we read a story about a brave mouse who saved a kingdom by being foolish enough to keep going. I told her then, soft and sure, that being brave does not always feel like glory. Sometimes it is simply that you keep making breakfast. I do not tell this story for pity. I tell it because I want the quiet vigor of ordinary people to be known. There is no grand sermon here, no tidy moral that fits on a church pamphlet. There is simply a life that has been broken and mended in places by time, and a truth that hurt and then taught. If someone comes to me now, eyes wide with the heat of discovery, and asks whether they should reveal the truth or keep it hidden, I answer with the voice of my years: truth, when it is safe to tell, can be so. But safety is not merely a feeling, it is a thing you build. Gather facts. Find room for your own heart to stand, and then speak. Sometimes people ask me if I regret loving. The answer is never. Love is the risk, and not loving is its own loss. I still keep photographs on the mantle of the small smiles we shared in better times. I keep them because they are true. The presence of goodness once does not erase the reality of later wrong. We can hold both things. That is the complicated adult work of living. Now, when I sit by the window that looks out on the street, where the maple trees throw down their shade, I often watch the children play. I see couples walking dogs, old men with hats, women with bright scarves, and I feel a surprising softness. The house is warm. The rooms have light. The table, that old friend, holds the marks of a life lived fully. People who come by often tell me how lovely my garden looks. I always tell them the truth. It took hard work. I planted things I liked. I watered them even when I was tired. It is a small brag that pleases me. If there is one thing I would give to someone who is where I was, the one whose heart has been stepped on by people you thought would never do such a thing, it would be the courage to draw a line. That line is not a sword. It is not meant to hurt. It is meant to show you where you will not be taken again. Draw it with patience and careful evidence. Keep your dignity as if it were the last good thing you own, because often it is. I am older now. My hair has gone a salt and pepper that I wear like a crown because it holds the map of a life. My hands are not as steady as they were when I first held a baby, but they are strong in other ways. They know how to prune a bush, how to fold sheets so the corners meet like a promise, how to move through a room with intention. I wake up and stretch and make tea, and I think sometimes about the softness of being ordinary. The betrayal I survived is a wrinkle in the skin of my story, but it is not the whole thing. When I pray, I do not ask for retribution or for the world to be made simple. I ask for clarity, for the ability to welcome the good back when it comes, and for the humility to continue learning. Life is a long teacher, if you let it be. I have learned to be careful but not hated, to be wise but not hard. The balance is delicate, and sometimes I wobble. But mostly, I stand, and in that standing there is a kind of victory. If you have stayed with me through this story, if my words reached you with their honest pulse, then remember this small truth. You do not have to look small because someone else wanted you that way. You can take back the pieces of your life and place them where you can see them in the light. You can choose what to let into the rooms you call your own. You can learn to be both soft and unyielding, and find that in that contradiction lives a strength that betrayers cannot steal. There are mornings now when I look at the photograph of my daughter. As a child, her grin crooked, a smear of jam on her chin, and I kiss it gently. I do not wish for the past to be different, because it is what it is. But I do wish for the future to be kinder, because I am living in it deliberately. That, in the end, is my revenge and my grace both, living deliberately, choosing again and again what to guard and what to give. If you ever visit, I'll pour you tea and show you my garden. You'll see marigolds and herbs, and a small wooden bench where I like to sit and watch passersby. You'll laugh at the way a cat thinks it owns the house. And if you ask, I might tell you this story as I have told it now, because stories are how we process the broken parts of ourselves and decide how to become whole on the other side. I will not ask you to judge. I will only ask you to keep your hands open for the small acts of kindness that rebuild us in the days after the storm.